Good morning, everyone. My name is Sahel Aslam from Crayon. I look after the IBM business for Crayon globally. This morning, I'd like to welcome you to a really exciting webinar today, where we'll discuss a really important topic, and that's how to actually operationalize AI, but in a responsible way. We need to have all the relevant controls and the governance that's needed to make it operational. I'll start off this morning with a very quick introduction, and then my colleague Hans Petter from IBM will delve much further into the subject of AI governance. So let me start off by quickly introducing Crayon. Crayon's been around for over 20 years. We operate in over 40 countries, and globally we have over 4,000 employees. In terms of our customer base, we have in the excess of 100,000 customers, either direct or indirect, with Crayon. With regards to IBM, we are a global platinum partner, which is the highest tier within IBM, and with revenues of over $15 million US. So what is Crayon about? Within Crayon, we've got three areas that we kind of focus on. IT cost optimization, which is core to our DNA, with the objective of assisting customers actually optimize their software spend. The second area that we focus on heavily is we assist customers in accelerating their journey to the cloud, and that goes from procuring cloud and also helping organizations to actually modernize their applications. And the third area we will be focused on a bit more today is to help customers actually unlock the value of their data and their adoption of AI within their businesses. So I really like this quote. It's not the strongest of species that will survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one who most responsive to change. And it's so relevant with AI. If you look at organizations and recent trends in the last 20 years, if you look at Kodak and what happened to its business in the 70s, it was actually one of the first to come out with digital cameras. But its focus and its core business was on its film and the film production business. But it kind of got left behind as customers moved away from traditional cameras to digital cameras. Its business almost fell apart. Whereas if you look at their competition at the time, Fuji, they realized the trend, and they actually diversified well in advance. So I think this is really relevant to AI. So customers need to realize that it's going to help them drive efficiency, competitiveness, and innovation. So what are the challenges that organizations are struggling with? While businesses recognize the power of AI, over 80% of leaders acknowledge the ethical concerns in adopting Gen AI. In general, what you find is that it kind of breaks down into four areas: the explainability, ethics, bias, and trust. And this, if you look at the stats, this is a main area where organizations are unable to operationalize their AI projects. And I think the last thing that I'd like to cover is it's so important now. In the summer of this year, the EU passed a legislation around how AI needs to be governed. And this is not just in Europe. There's laws that are being passed throughout the world. And so it's something that is very important. So hence today's discussion about how to actually operationalize AI with IBM watsonx AI governance. With that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Hans Petter from IBM.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I go by HP. I'm looking after the AI for Business platform for IBM in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Three very diverse areas of the world, also in terms of AI maturity. Europe is ahead, I would say, and in Europe, certainly the UK is ahead of mainland Europe in terms of AI investment and AI development. There's still a lot of venture capital in London, which is finding its way to AI startups. And in Middle East and Africa, there's significant investment in Saudi and in the United Emirates. Next slide, please, Suhail. If you're under the age of 35, IBM might not mean so much to you. And if you didn't know, IBM has actually been around for 113 and a half years. I like the Charles Darwin quote too. It absolutely means that IBM has the ability to change. And I guess I'm the proof that you don't have to be the most intelligent to survive anyway. What you probably didn't know is that IBM is the world's oldest AI company. We weren't part of the group of 3 students that coined the term in the 50s. Had we been, we probably wouldn't have agreed to use the term artificial intelligence. For us, when you operationalize it, the purpose of this technology isn't to replace human intelligence with something that's artificial. It's to augment human intelligence. So you don't remove the human from the loop. You repurpose a lot of what the human does, actually, and you allow the technology to drive new business and also automate. We've been through several cycles of AI investment. We've been developing AI technology since the 60s. And if you're watching HBO at the moment, there's a mini-series called Rematch that shows how IBM Deep Blue took on Garry Kasparov in the 90s for a game of chess or two. It's really, really fascinating. So this is sort of the 60s saw a sustained period of AI investment, then it sort of vanished, and the periods and the decades without any investment is commonly referred to as an AI winter. At the moment, we are in a very, very progressed spring. As Suhail said, AI is definitely here to stay. The question at the moment is how much are we able to operationalize? We saw a renewed interest in AI in 2011 when IBM's Watson technology beat 2 reigning champions in the TV show Jeopardy in the US. And that spurred a lot of corporate investment into AI technologies, realizing how much or how powerful natural language generation is in combination with machine learning algorithms. So since 2011, we've probably been involved in 50, 60,000 AI related projects globally. And that, of course, triggered another initiative that we started to look into, or IBM Research started to look into what we call explainability in machine learning models in 2013. We're very proud of IBM Research. It is the biggest privately funded research organization in tech on the planet. We've been holding patent leadership for 30 plus years. A couple of years ago, our CEO, Arvind Krishna, said that the patent leadership is no longer so important because this technology is moving so quickly that we need more of the fantastic innovations in IBM Research to get to product much quicker. So particularly in terms of generative AI, we've seen a lot of IBM Research initiatives into how you can make that a trusted business operation. How can you trust the output from a generative foundation model? How can you measure whether or not the output is a result of hallucinations and things like that? So just in the past couple of years, or in the past years, we've done more than 1,000 generative AI for business engagements of various sizes, right? One that we are very, very proud of is for a group of newspapers in northern Norway. They have a lot of journalists that spent an inordinate a lot of time just looking at planning permissions in the municipalities. So what we've done is that we've built a generative AI model for them that will scan all the planning permissions and provide a summary. and highlight the ones that are probably worthy of further journalistic investigations. That's proven to be a significant success for them, and saving a lot of journalists' time, and actually making much more of their investigative work more relevant. We are an AI for business company, so we don't, if you want to use ChatGPT to provide a song for your son's birthday, that's okay with us. We don't touch that kind of use case. But we want to make credit risk scoring, we want to make customer operations, we want to do software engineering and those kind of enterprise use cases safe for you. We realized that you need to have a strong governance backbone. So we have an AI governance platform, and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of it. But it's basically linked, or basically based on very mature governance technology. From an IBM own perspective, we have operationalized more than 6,000 AI use cases. Just think about that number. 6,000 AI use cases. We have automated 96% of our HR processes, and that has led to a significant improvement in manager satisfaction with how HR processes are executed internally in IBM. And those that are back as HR partners are focusing their time on much bigger and broader issues on how to develop a company culture, etc. This all started with us appointing an AI global ethics lead back in 2015. She is Italian. Her name is Francesca Rossi, and she sits with IBM Research, and she holds the highest sort of position that you can have in research. She started to outline some ethical principles on how we do AI internally, and also how we sell this technology externally. Then in 2017, we formalized with an AI ethics board, which is co-led by our global AI ethics lead and our chief privacy officer. So we have a legal view as well as an ethical view on this. They've developed a risk framework that allows us to adopt AI use cases and operationalize them much quicker. So there's obviously an approval process, and there's an operationalization process as well that's based on a risk framework, which of course fundamentally means we don't break the law in any of the markets that we operate. But IBM also has some ethical principles that we need to adhere to in terms of the kind of AI use cases that we use. We have white papered a lot of these use cases, particularly in HR. So if you're interested in reading more about these use cases specifically, I'm very happy to help. We also are involved in developing AI legislation, or advising on it, I would say. In 2020, as the first and I think only big tech company, we did publish a white paper in favor of introducing regulation for the use of AI, recognizing that the technology must be left alone to evolve and develop organically, but also recognizing that there are potential for harmful use here, right? So I'll discuss the EU AI Act in not a lot of detail, but I'll discuss it high level very soon, and then we'll talk a little bit about how IBM's view on the AI legislation is very much in line with the approach that the EU have chosen. I'm sure a lot of you have been frustrated implementing GDPR for the EU AI Act, which is a very different kind of legislation from GDPR. High-risk use cases will be accompanied by some technical standards that are being developed currently. And that will, we think, make compliance with the EU AI Act much quicker and much cheaper than, for instance, the GDPR, where a lot of the legal definitions have been settled in the courts of law. That was a long introduction to the fabulous history of IBM. I'm a little bit sorry for it, but also just to emphasize our deep expertise and experience in AI, as well as being able to operationalize it. Next slide, please. The next slides I won't spend so much time with each slide, I promise you. We spend a lot of time understanding the risk associated with an AI use case. We sort of have three main categories of risk: regulatory risk, reputational risk, and operational risk. At the moment, and I'll discuss much more about the operational risk than the two others. At the moment, we do speak to a lot of frustrated CEOs and CFOs that have spent a lot of money on AI investments, but are seeing very little return of investment because it's just not an ability to operationalize it. We find that very interesting, and we see 2025 as kind of a very pivotal year for how companies actually learn to trust and use AI in the core of their business, instead of just touching the edges of productivity enhancements. Next slide, please. Which is a video, so you can click and maybe we can play the video too. There we go. Okay. We have, based on a white paper that our ethics board published last year, around new and enhanced risks with generative AI, they identified 50. We have open sourced what we call the IBM AI Risk Atlas. So you can Google this, or whatever search engine of your choice. You can search for the IBM AI Risk Atlas and you'll get to this page where you can drill down into individual risks associated with AI, where we describe some of them in more detail, and also we start introducing some measurements around how you can mitigate these risks through both your risk frameworks as well as your other frameworks. Next slide, please. No, I think yeah, there we go. Regulatory risk. I'm just going to say a few words around the EU AI Act and also some other regulation globally. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that the EU AI Act is not the only AI-related regulation on the planet currently. There are tons. The EU AI Act is very comprehensive, and a regulation in the EU is a comprehensive thing. Just think GDPR, etc. And we certainly expect there to be a significant Brussels effect of the EU AI Act. But if you look at the US, for instance, there are more than 58. I think that was the last number I heard anyway, and that's a while ago. 58 AI-related regulations across 50 US states. They do regulate with a different view often in the US, but it doesn't necessarily make it easy for an American company to operate with the same version of AI across the 50 states in America if they treat it differently. So global regulation is a concern for OECD, for instance, and also the World Trade Organizations, particularly for global companies. And global companies' ability to use the same version of an AI use case across the globe. These will also be supported by different technical standards. So the World Trade Organization certainly encourages that the EU adopts as many ISO standards as possible to support the EU AI Act. Next slide, please. If we look at the impact on businesses, the main thing to consider or just think about is that the EU AI Act is there to protect the interest and security and safety of EU citizens inside the single market. So it controls market access to the EU single market. So it's not just the EU member states, it's also the EEA states. So Norway, Iceland and Luxembourg are also part of the single market and will have to adopt the EU AI Act as it is. It's aligned with other regulations. If you talk to lawyers, they might claim that it's just stitched together by existing regulation. They may or may not have a point. If you read the EU Act, it is 280 pages long. I have discussed this with a number of lawyers that feels it could be done in 30 pages, but hey, there we are. There is an implementation period. It came into effect on August 1st last year. If you remember, there was an EU parliamentary election last year, so they passed a lot of new regulation, and it took time for that regulation to come into the official journal. So even though the EU Act was passed quite early in springtime, it took a long time for it to come into effect and for the clock to start ticking. We'll go through the timeline as well. It is use case based. So it's what you do with the technology, regardless of whether it's generative AI or not, who creates it, where it's deployed. If you have an AI use case that is in use in the EU single market, it doesn't matter if your server is in America or India or anywhere. It's still you still have to comply with the regulation and the requirements from the regulation. It's risk-based. The higher the risk is, the more oversight. The higher risk is actually, it's prohibited, and there are different requirements for different roles. Next slide, please. a lot of key requirements for businesses, and whether you're a provider of a high-risk AI system or a deployer of a high-risk AI system, you have various regulatory requirements. They've put a lot of obligations on the provider side, but if you grab IBM's Granite model, for instance, and you enrich that model with your own data, you go from being a deployer to a provider, and you have to be aware of that because the regulatory requirements are very different. It's interesting how they approach generative AI. They call that general purpose AI models. They have two levels of foundation models, basically. One, that applies for everyone, and basically just 4 simple requirements. You have to provide a summary of the technical documentation of the model, and provide that documentation to downstream providers building applications on top of your model. You have to document the training data used, or provide a summary is the wording, whatever that means. Probably it means that you need to be more comprehensive than just say it's trained on data from the internet. And a couple of interesting requirements too, that you have to respect EU copyright law. We're waiting for exactly what that means. It could have some impact on how models are trained and the kind of data that we use for the training of the models. They also have a second tier foundation models called systemic risk, which is measured in the number of floating point operations or data power, computing power it was used to train the model. There's a threshold there. We think only a couple of models will qualify as systemic risk, and they come with significant transparency obligations. We don't think that OpenAI will pull out of Europe, although Sam Altman did say he didn't particularly enjoy the obligations put on the model side. And I'm also sure that you saw Meta choosing not to launch one of their multi-model modules in Europe, stating that uncertainty around regulation meant that they didn't feel it was safe to do. Had nothing to do with the EU Act. It was all to do with GDPR, which has been inexistent for a long time. I think with this slide, the most important thing is Article 4B, AI literacy for providers and deployers. So anybody providing or deploying an AI system in the single market will have a literacy requirement to train users just to bring AI literacy up to a certain level. I think this is really, really important because I think in general, what's probably stopping us from operationalizing much more AI currently is that we don't have enough AI literate people. So there's a significant requirement on schools, universities, high schools, as well as literacy training for employees of a certain age. Next slide, please. How are AI systems classified? Unacceptable, high risk, transparency, minimal, or no risk. By far, most AI use cases will have minimal or no risk classification. That will be permitted. There won't be any additional AI Act requirements, just the AI literacy requirement, which kicks in actually on the 1st of February already. Transparency risk are use cases like chatbots and deepfakes. So basically, all you have to do is declare that you're now talking to a chatbot, declare that you're now watching a deepfake video or deepfake content. I'll cover high risk, but first, unacceptable risk. There are not many, but there are certain use areas that have been deemed unacceptable and prohibited by the EU. And this is the first sort of to kick in terms of timeline. It's just 2 months away, 1st of February. Things like social scoring, which is a big thing in China, which we don't like in Europe, is prohibited. So if you have an AI system that social scores people, get rid of it. And there are some manipulative AI systems as well. We don't think that means Instagram algorithms. It's more if you sort of use manipulative algorithms to shape buying patterns and things like that. They also introduced emotion recognition in the workspace and educational institutions as a prohibited practice about a year ago when they reached political agreement on this. We hope that doesn't mean, we don't expect it to mean that they're going to touch or put any unacceptable risk for things like sentiment analysis, for instance, which is a very useful area to explore using AI technologies. We do work with companies with high, with a high volume of customer care calls, for instance, where you have AI algorithms that can listen into these calls and figure out the exact moment the sentiment of the call changed. So whether you said or you didn't say anything that could have saved or provided a better customer experience. So I think a lot of sentiment analysis, there are some really, really good AI use cases for that. High-risk use cases will be permitted, but subject to compliance with the requirements of the AI Act. High-risk use cases, think credit risk scoring, think recruitment, think in general just HR use cases, right? Where there is a risk of either bias or unwanted bias or forbidden bias, discrimination, that kind of thing. They come with sort of 7 essential requirements that you need to implement to comply with them. And these 7 essential requirements have been translated into standards, technical standards. So that's what 2 out of the 3 European technical standardization organizations, CEN and CENELEC, are working on at the moment. So to provide these 10 technical standards that will support you comply with the requirements for high-risk use cases. The way this will work is we expect them to be ready in about a year's time. And then you can implement them. And if you've implemented all 10 of the standards, you achieve what they call a presumption of conformity, and you can do a conformative self-assessment based on the standards. Otherwise, you'd need to have a third-party assessment that you conform with the requirements. There's a lot of technical legal stuff here, but I just wanted to give you sort of some insight into the complexities as well that this will provide for European business or businesses operating in the European single market. But please take away that most of your use cases will be minimal and no risk, right? But you have some regulatory requirements in the high risk area, and you need to classify your AI use cases to ensure that you don't break the law and that you have classify them correctly. I will also say this, that most companies have ethical frameworks that are far more comprehensive than avoid breaking the law, right? So you'll probably have some risk classifications in your own risk framework that goes over and beyond the requirements of the EU Act. Right, next slide, please. This one progresses, so you can just click on this one. The next date is prohibited systems in 6 months. So it kicked in on the 1st of August. The prohibited systems will have to be removed by 1st of February. If you just click again, you'll see that the general purpose systems, the transparency obligations for foundation models and things like that will come into play on the 1st of August late next year in 2025. Click again, please. We expect the technical standards at the end of 2025. And then the high risk use cases will be, you'll have to comply with the requirements after 24 months. So the 1st of August, 2026. It doesn't mean that you should wait, right? It means that already now you can start risk assessing your AI use cases relative to the requirements of the law and start implementing the requirements, and also understanding how you can automate as much as this as possible, so you reduce the bureaucratic overlay that is associated with regulation. I think there might be one more click on this timeline. There are some exceptions that kicks in after 36 months. These are pretty much already products that are already contained by some sort of regulation. Next slide, please. Operational risk, much more interesting to talk about. Deloitte showed just before the summer break, had a CEO study around generative AI enterprise systems. And basically we have a fundamental trust issue with generative AI, which is significant. Deloitte research showed that AI starts out in a trust deficit. When customers know a brand is associating with AI or generative AI, the brand trust declines by a factor of 12. Factor of 12 is significant. And why is this relevant from a return of investment perspective? It's actually a fundamental issue for a return of investment factor. You only get return of investment if you have users that are using your AI systems. If they don't trust your AI systems, they don't use your AI systems. And if they don't use your AI systems, you're never going to get return of investment. Next slide shows that we also have a bit of a paradox. Companies are overstating how much AI they use. I find that really, really fascinating. So there's obviously a coolness factor associated with using a lot of AI, but at the same time, we have a trust issue. And so while we want to say that we are AI and data driven, the reality is, and IDC and other research show this as well, is we're only really touching the edges of productivity enhancements instead of starting to touch the core of businesses. Say that financial institutions, insurance companies are the industries that are furthest advanced in terms of AI adoption, very much in the productivity space, very little in the core business space. And public sector is unfortunately far behind. But we have initiatives in countries like Denmark, for instance, where public sector are now trying to accelerate their AI journey. The BBC article that I referenced to here is actually referencing Amazon Fresh and Amazon Go stores in the US that Amazon claim are fully automated using AI technology. So basically, when you go into one of their stores, they use facial recognition software to figure out who you are. Then they have loads of sensors following you around the shop to figure out what you pick and put in your basket. And then they'll take your money when you leave the shop. What they don't tell you is that they've got a couple of thousand people in India that is reviewing that footage. That might not be a bad idea, right? We have human oversight to make sure that the AI algorithms perform. But it's sort of also called, it's not fully automated then if you have human oversight. And we think you should always have a level of human oversight. Anyway, next slide, please. I do live in Denmark, and I thought this study, Denmark being one of the most digitalized societies on the planet, I thought this study was really, really, it made sense to me because it really resonates with all the I have with companies across Europe in particular. 81% of Danish executives, probably increased since then, believe Gen AI will have a positive impact, but only 5% is operationalized. Only 5% of the Gen AI sandbox experimentation is put into production, and 5% is never going to give you any return of investment. This is actually quite, or can be quite expensive technology, and it can be quite expensive to develop the use cases. The potential is tremendous, but you have to figure out the right areas to invest in. I did discuss this with IDC, and they've seen the same in their analysis. There is a lot of experimentation at the moment for the sake of experimenting. So a lot of the AI sandbox experiments that we see is not driven by requirements from the business owners. And I spoke about the IBM AI Ethics Board. It's a cross-company board where every part of IBM is represented. And there's a lot of business enablement, AI enablement of individual business units as well to make the approval process of AI use cases much smoother. But unless you actually involve the business, you're never going to succeed. And just ask yourself this: who owns AI? You know, who is the natural owner of an AI system or use case in your company? Naturally, it is the businesses. It's the businesses that drives these requirements. And for generative AI in particular, the four main areas haven't really changed since we saw the introduction of generative AI. Generative AI is fantastic in terms of generating new content, and it coexists very much with existing or with more traditional AI machine learning models, but it's customer operations, software engineering, research and development, and sales and marketing. Those are the four investment areas for generative AI, and they have to be driven by these requirements. Insufficient talent pool is definitely a bottleneck, and certainly IBM and other big tech vendors are investing a lot of time and effort in providing education to companies and to students to help understand the powerful potential of this technology. Next slide, please. So we have a CEO study out as well, and I've just summarized some of the hard truths that CEOs must face, because any company's AI success will depend on the involvement of the CEO. The CEO has a C-level group with conflicting interest. Unless there's a conformed strategy on where you want and what you want to achieve with your AI, these C-levels aren't good sparring partners, because they will take your AI strategy in different directions. Also, there's no time at the moment to be sentimental about your long-term ecosystem partnerships. If your current established ecosystem doesn't provide you with the ability to succeed in providing new value over and above just automation and productivity enhancements, you can't be sentimental. And remember that the customer isn't always right, because the customer doesn't necessarily understand what this technology can do or bring. You might not even know it yet, and the technology might not be invented. So I think there's a lot of new scope for creativity here, and to take the use of this technology in completely new directions. But don't think that you can do this and shortcut your way to success. Tech shortcuts are a dead end. You are going to fail, and you're going to invest a lot of money without getting return of investment on it. And invest in talent and skills. Your team isn't as strong as you think it is. It's a desperate need to increase overall AI skills, both in terms of AI engineers, but also in terms of general AI literacy, to understand where you can apply this technology. And also, don't forget that people are worried about their jobs here. We say people hate progress. Well, it's just an expression to underline that you have to spend a lot of time building your vision, building your culture to drive change inside your organization. I can tell you that a lot of IBM managers were worried when so much of the HR processes were to be automated and they lost their HR partner. But now, if you ask them now a year later, they couldn't be happier. So we've invested a lot of time and effort in building this vision and building this culture. And it's such an important requirement to succeed here and ultimately get return of investment. Never lose sight of that. It's all about your return of investment. This technology is only powerful if you drive usage. Next slide, please. This is where we are at the moment, and now I'm getting ready to wrap up. We talk about generative AI. Analysts agree, and we agree, that about 35 to 40% of your AI investment will be generative AI. The rest will be other types of AI. And don't forget, and we don't talk about that enough, we have so many beautiful machine learning algorithms in production that are performing perfectly. They need to be governed. All forms of AI needs to be governed in a consistent manner. And you need to be able to have an open governance platform that allows you to extend your governance to account for new aspects of generative AI and other forms of new AI. And also be able to absorb new and amplified risks. As I said, there's a white paper out from the IBM AI ethics paper talking about 50 amplified and new risks. The innovation in models is, excuse the expression, is absolutely insane. The biggest AI open source marketplace on the planet is a company called Hugging Face, and Hugging Face are getting 5,000 new foundation models every week. Every week, they have more than 1 million foundation models to choose from, and we see that as a very clear trend. There isn't one big model to rule them all. A lot of the smaller models are much more cost efficient and much better at solving very specific generative AI use cases for you. The biggest models are like the world's biggest Swiss Army knife, and you have such a multitude of tools available to you that you're bound to choose the wrong tool eventually. With smaller models, you have very specifically trained models that are very, very good at your particular use case. So you have to have governance structures and processes around that allows you to pick the right models and have an audit trail on how you test, for instance, prompts against different models to see how they perform. One concern that we have and other analysts also have is the fact that 40% of the AI you use as a company will be embedded into your business applications. And that is your vendor's secret sauce, right? So they're not going to give up their algorithms, and they're not going to tell you necessarily how they've trained their models and how they monitor them. Are you comfortable with that? If you have an HR system that screens CVs and recommends candidates, are you comfortable if you don't understand how that model is trained? What if it just recommends men? What if it's biased against, LBGT plus people, or what if it's biased against women? Do you understand? Can you monitor that? Can you measure that? Can you actually look into how they explain the output from those models? The people in your procurement departments, do they have enough AI literacy to ask the right questions and actually have the right requirements? The EU will certainly expect you to have an AI inventory. So as a minimum, you need to be able to explain what kind of business models or business applications you have that have AI embedded. And a lot of your cloud services will have undeclared AI, We spoke about the EU AI Act and the standardization requests. I think it's very useful for a company to dive deeper. I'm sure you have legal departments that already have done that. And you see a lot of law firms currently running a lot of deep dives on what does this actually mean for you. Next slide, please. And now we're getting to the end of it. AI governance is the enabler for AI innovation at scale. We know this. We have more than 6,000 AI use cases in production using a risk and governance framework. That sounds very, very, very bureaucratic. And trust me, you can't add layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy and expect to succeed either. But it's always a balance, right? The reality is that a lot of AI has been deployed in silos. Somebody's had a good idea, gone to the AI engineer agreed, developed a model and put it into production. So there's a lot of AI models out there that's unknown, right? Companies doesn't necessarily know how many AI models they have in production, what state they're in. It's a huge problem because now you need to take control of your AI. You're already deployed AI. There's legislation coming, but also you want to do this as securely as possible. So I was just saying that if you're a startup with an AI model discovery tool, that might not be a bad business idea at the moment. Anyway, so what we've done, next slide, please, is we've built an AI governance platform with 3 categories or 3 areas: lifecycle governance, where you consistently govern, catalog, and monitor all your AI models from anywhere. Your risk management, where you manage your model risk, your use case risk, issues and mitigation, and action to business standards. And regulatory compliance, where you ensure you adhere to external AI regulations for audit and compliance as well. Next slide, please. It looks a little bit like this. So the lifecycle management is contained by what we call AI documentation. And this is where you monitor an entire AI use case lifecycle. Somebody has an idea, that idea goes into an approval process. And from that moment, a lot of metadata is started to be collected around that idea through the approval process, the engineering process, the testing process, the production process, the monitoring process, we found an issue that we have to resolve process, and back into production. All of that is automatically captured. You can add metadata, but you can also trust that the metadata will conform to the requirements from the EU, for instance, around AI use case documentation. We sync that with the AI risk governance piece. This is where you do your use case and asset inventory. This is where you can test a AI use case idea against your own risk framework, against the regulatory requirements. So the EU AI Act now comes as part of this product, where you have dashboards, issue management, you manage regulatory compliance and operational risk. Your chief AI officer will have a view on every single AI use case. Your business owners will have a view of their use cases, if that's how you choose to set it up. Click just once, please. And we've chosen to do this in an open way. So we don't care what platform you build your AI use case on. If you're a Microsoft Azure user, that's fine. We totally support that. If you use Data IQ, we support that, AWS. If it's Python, it's very simple. Otherwise, we'll have to build an API. Just click again, please. From your build platform, you also build the metrics that you want to monitor your use case for. For traditional machine learning models, we understand this really well. You know, it's drift, it's bias, it's explainability, it's all that. For generative AI, the metrics are slightly more complex because, you know, how do you measure hallucination? How do you apply a RAG score or a RUG score? And how can you find whether input or output contains hate, abuse, profanity, or contains personal identifiable information, things you don't want to give an external provider of a model. So we don't touch the model. If you want to use GPT as your underlying model, that's fine. What we do is we monitor the prompt, and we have a certain set of metrics going into the model. So if, for instance, you want to check whether anybody's prompt contains hate, abuse, profanity, PII, or IP information, we can do that. And then we send it through to the model, and then we monitor the output of the model too. Does it contain hate, abuse, profanity? How likely is it that it's a result of hallucination? What's the accuracy? Things like that. We have a very rich library of monitoring metrics that you can apply to your AI use cases. Click one more time, please. We have equally an open strategy for your deployed platform. So if you want to build on IBM watsonx.ai and deploy on Microsoft Azure, very supported. And then if you click one more time, we do from the deploy platform, we have runtime monitoring for compliance and business outcomes. So we don't rely so much on what's commonly referred to as guardrails. Oftentimes guardrails will be added to the prompts of a generative AI use case, making the prompt very heavy and takes a long time to execute. We have these monitoring metrics and the ability to monitor these on runtime. So when you actually execute the prompting. So I compare this to an airbag in a car. It's very useful when you crash, but an airbag won't prevent your car from crashing. Runtime monitoring will prevent you from crashing, so you don't need the guardrails as such. I have one more click to show you, and then we are open for questions. We have mapped the requirements of our watsonx governance platform against the requirements of the EU Act. This is just to give you an idea of how comprehensive that regulation is. It shouldn't scare you from deploying AI, but it should definitely demonstrate that it's something that you need to think about. Particularly how you risk assess your AI use cases and how you implement the requirements from the regulation. I know this is a lot of information to take in, and I'm sorry, but if I can just summarize what I've said is governance. Don't think of governance as layers and layers of bureaucracy preventing you from being successful with AI. On the contrary, governance and having a governance framework and a governance platform that allows you to automate as much of your framework as possible will enable you to deploy and be successful with AI use cases at scale. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it interesting. And if you have any questions, I do believe we have about 10 more minutes.
Thank you, Hans-Petter. We don't have any questions right now in the Q&A section.
Okay.
But of course, participants can send us questions at a later moment.
Perfect.
So yeah.
Back to
Thank
you
for that. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. So just to close off, I just wanted to touch on our AI practice globally. Just a couple of numbers. We have over 150 employees that are dedicated to AI. We've completed over 300 projects. And with 120 plus customers, and that's growing all the time. And then last of all, just a quick quote from Minari. Now, it's a US organization that focuses on the next generation of seeds, and they used us to help them with a project that had a combination of AI and gene technology that unlock the full potential of new seed generation throughout the agricultural and food industry. So that's the last slide. If there's any questions, then please add them to the chat. If not, feel free to email us. Thank you.
So at this moment, there are no questions in the chat, so we can wrap it up.
And you're welcome to find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect on LinkedIn as well. Always a pleasure to talk to people on LinkedIn.
Thanks, HV. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.